Well, welcome to the Shelf Life web series. I'm Zachary Page. I work with the RSDP uh, arm of University of Minnesota Extension. And yeah, we've been doing these once a month. They've been going great. Have really amazing speakers with us. We've got someone really special today for you, Rial Carver with K-State Research and Extension. And we're going to be talking about startup to transition. So transition grocery. Maybe you're not there yet, but it's going to come at some point, and maybe you're on the other end of transition. You're just transitioning in. So all these stages we'll be chatting about. Um, yeah, the Regional Sustainable Development Partnership, real quick. What we do, we work with these four sectors here in the five areas of Greater Minnesota: Northwest, Northeast, Central, Southwest, Southeast. We work with community boards and work with grounded, community-led projects. And what better way to work with the community than rural grocery stores? We've been doing that for about 10 years now. And I'd say that's probably in the resilient communities section there. And you could learn more about our work with grocery stores and get some more resources. The all of our web series are recorded as well, so you could watch any of them over again or watch ones that you missed, or read about our survey, big survey we did in 2020 with all of the grocery stores. 125 responded with really great insights. So we've got summary of that, produce handling, all these other resources. So that's our resource center. And the reason we do this work is, we know about the aging infrastructure that you're all dealing with, and also um, clean energy equipment that could be used and utilized. And then, yeah, you know what? You're up against a lot of stuff here. So we know that it's a challenge, and we're here to support. Without further ado, there's just one more thing, I suppose, is the Fair Fund grant is due um, before our next web series. So I just wanted to remind people this one is good for infrastructure um, and lending. So feel free to check it out and reach out to me if you have questions. Reach out to them. This is the reinvestment fund. So I'm going to pass it off to Rael, our speaker, and I'll stop sharing, and then she'll pick it up.
Great. Thanks, Zach. Let me just double check that I have the right screen selected. And thanks everybody for having me today. Thanks for inviting me, Zach. There we go. There are my slides. I will put it in slideshow. Hopefully that's working for you all. If you're not seeing the Shelf Life series slides, let me know. I see nodding heads. All right, so today I just wanted to share a little bit about the Rural Grocery Initiative, which is the organization that I lead. Talk about resources at any stage for rural grocers. So I've split it into three main categories of beginning grocers, the growth and maturity phase, and then transition planning. We'll have some time to respond to a few prompts around this topic, and then we'll wrap up by 4 o'clock. So just for some background, the Rural Grocery Initiative was started in 2007 after a series of listening sessions took place across the state of Kansas, where we heard that the long-term viability and vibrancy of the local grocery store was in question, and residents were worried about what would happen to their community if the store were not to stay open. And so the folks at the time worked to start understanding why keeping rural grocery stores in communities is so important. And so really the focus of our organization is to sustain locally owned rural grocery stores because we know that they enhance community vitality and they improve access to healthy food. And we know that the benefits of rural grocery stores are clear. They are anchor institutions in our rural communities. They provide economic benefits, public health benefits, and are critical community infrastructure. These are things that you all are well aware of. And yet it is a difficult business to run. The grocery industry in general runs on very thin profit margins. The trends in grocery have shown um, a picture of decline. And some of what our team is doing is trying to reverse that trend. Our team and folks like the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships in Minnesota and others. So some of these challenges, slim profit margins, high operating costs, population decline, distribution and competition, again, is not something new to you all. Um, in Kansas, we've done some tracking of grocery stores, and we saw over a 10-year period that 1 in 5 rural grocery stores closed their doors. That is right alongside national trends showing, actually, it's a little ahead of national trends nationally over a similar period. Rural independent stores closed at a rate of about 15%. And so, again, as you all know, grocery is a tricky business, and I think it's really important to state that at the beginning that the net profit margins of grocery stores are just small, which means that there's little room for error. And for years, I heard grocery is a volume game, and it really didn't click until I was starting to see what that means for a store that has $2 million in annual sales, where that one, if you're running on 1 to 2% net profit margin, that's about $20,000 versus a store that's doing $20 million in annual sales, where the net profit at the end of the year is much larger. And so I think this is important to understand some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that rural grocers might have. So our team provides technical assistance. We have a variety of online resources in our resource library available. We host educational events and networking opportunities. We're involved in the Kansas Healthy Food Initiative, which is sort of the funding arm of our work. We conduct research, and then we train others to support rural grocers through business transition. A lot of this is happening in Kansas, but we've also learned that this type of support doesn't exist all across the country. And so sometimes we engage with other states, but we're really happy to have partners like Minnesota Extension to work on this topic. So before I keep going, we're going to do just a couple of poll questions. The first one is a poll question to get a sense of who's in the audience today. So I think our tech support people, yes, there it is, are going to share the poll question. So if you want to just let us know where you're calling in from, we'll take a 30, 45 seconds to get this answered. And then later in the session, when we break out into some discussion groups, we'll kind of split up by region. So let's just do 5 to 10 more seconds, and then we can close the poll. Looks like we've got some folks from Minnesota and North Dakota today, so welcome everyone. Alrighty, let's go ahead and close the poll and share those results. All right, so we've got, like I said, some representation across Minnesota, a few folks from North Dakota. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm going to close that and move to my next slide. So for today's session, we really wanted to talk about what are some of the resources available for rural grocers across various stages of their business. And we hear a lot about startup, or in this slide, it's showing the introduction stage where someone's just getting into the business, just getting their feet under them. Typically, I think of this as the first 3 to 5 years of operating your business, where you're really working to set some processes in place and get your feet under you so you have a good reputation in the community. People can start to rely on you. You then move into the growth and maturity stages where you are increasing or leveling out with sales, your costs are starting to stabilize, and you're starting to either stabilize or increase profits. And then towards the end, this is where I think of maybe you're planning to retire in the next 5 years or so. This is when this slide shows it as the decline stage. I think of it as the transition stage of getting ready to exit the business or getting ready to retire. So this would be where you're starting to hand off some responsibilities. There might be a reduction in sales as you are getting close to leaving the business. There might be some reduction in profits as you are trying to step away a little bit. So we wanted to get a sense again of who's in the room. If we could open the poll to get a sense of what stage our businesses are in that are in the room today. So we've got the startup, which would be you've just entered the business in the last 5 years. Growth and mature growth would be, let's say, growth and maturity. There's a little bit of overlap there, but based on the slide, pick which one makes the most sense to you. And then transition would be planning to retire in the next 5 years. And once again, we'll give it another 10, 15 seconds to get everyone's responses. Interestingly, so far, no one has said they're in the transition phase. So that's interesting to see. But good that we have people that are newer to grocery. That's what we need in our rural communities. Alrighty, let's go ahead and close it and we'll share our results. So yeah, it looks like we're kind of evenly split between startup, growth, and maturity, a little bit heavier on startup. So I'm glad that we can be sharing some of these resources with you. All right, so resources for beginning grocers. I want to first start with grocer associations and supporters. These are people you can rely on to be doing similar, to understand your industry, understand the business that you are operating. So in the upper Midwest, the Minnesota Grocers Association, the North Dakota Grocers Association are two great exemplars of grocery industry associations. There are state grocer associations across the country, and they really vary state to state on what the focus of the association is. Some are more focused on training, some are more focused on certain industry aspects of the grocery industry. One thing that I think is pretty standard across all is the focus on connecting grocers to legislators and lobbying on behalf of the grocery industry. And so it can be a really important connection to make as a grocer to help inform legislation or policy at your state level. The National Grocers Association, as you might guess, is essentially your state-based association, but at a national level. And this, I think, can be a really great organization to be involved in to get a sense of what others are dealing with in parts of this country that may not be right next to you. There are tons of resources through the NGA, National Grocers Association, and the National Grocers Association Foundation. These are all membership-based organizations, though, so there is a cost associated with them. So I want to point out some of the more accessible resources as well. And again, in the upper Midwest, you all have some excellent resources. Obviously, Minnesota Extension is hosting this webinar series. They have a wealth of knowledge around rural grocery. The North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Cooperatives has also been an important partner in supporting rural grocers, and has even supported in both cases, these organizations has supported development of different funding programs that are targeted towards grocery. There's also a few different learning opportunities that I'd point you to. So, the Rural Grocery Initiative has an online grocery operations training. It's a free set of 10 modules that you can complete at your own speed, and it's available year round. It goes through all sorts of different topics, but is really focused on the startup process of opening a grocery store. So, how are you thinking about your store layout? How are you thinking about your equipment that you need? What types of hiring standard operating procedures do you want to have in place before you open on day one? Another one that is, I think, really well received is the Mighty Community Markets Grocery Boot Camp. And this is a 6 week remote course held online. It typically is offered twice a year, maybe in like the summer or spring and the fall. And it's taught by both of these trainings actually are taught by grocery operators or previous grocery operators. So they have the experience of what it's like to run a grocery store. The Mighty Community Markets training, I think, does an excellent job of talking through how to use your financial records or your financial system for tracking certain metrics and ensuring helping you identify decision points for improvement or develop some goals for how you want your store to perform. There's also a lot of discussion around marketing and sort of distinguishing your store in the community. There is the price for that course depends on the size of the store, but for smaller stores, I think less than 1 million in sales per year, you can access the course for that lower price. There's also a variety of conferences that are related to the grocery industry. The NGA show is the sort of, I guess, gold standard for grocery. They host a show every year, and the next one is in February of 2026. They actually are currently looking for presenters. So if you're interested in talking about something that you do uniquely at your store and it's related to one of these topics that's listed at the bottom, technology, business strategy, fresh foods, merchandising, operations, marketing, or personnel development, they would love to hear from you. This is the NGA as an organization has a ton of resources, and as a supporter of independent grocers, it includes not just rural. And so the conference that really is the place to be for all things rural grocery is the National Rural Grocery Summit, which the Rural Grocery Initiative will be co-hosting in 2026 with University of Minnesota Extension and the North Dakota Association of Rural Electric Co-ops. So we'll be in Fargo next May, and I hope you all will save the date and plan to come. This is a biennial summit, so we host it every other year, and we've started moving it around the country just to make it a little more accessible to grocers in different parts of the country. So, on to resources for growth and maturity. And I guess a slight flaw in this slide deck is that from startup to growth and maturity, a lot of those resources carry over and vice versa. So there's definitely some overlap. But as you are kind of getting stabilized within your store and starting to look for ways to improve and optimize, one thing that the Rural Grocery Initiative has developed is the rural grocery peer groups, and these are open to grocers. It has traditionally been focused in the Midwest, and you can see in the map on the left that there are grocers participating in our 2025 peer groups from all over the Midwest. And this type of platform, it's a monthly call where grocers come together and they really lead the discussion. They share with each other, and the Rural Grocery Initiative team is really just there to facilitate the calls. We let the grocers really lead the way and lead the discussion. But being inherently isolated as a rural grocer, this is a way to connect with others that are dealing with some very similar challenges. And this model, so this is an annual cycle where we open this up. There's an application to apply. So probably late fall, early next year, we'll be opening this up again. And there are other groups that do similar format type opportunities. So the Food Co-op Initiative hosts a peer learning group that is specific to food co-ops. The NGA, again, has what they call share groups. And instead of identifying that sort of regionally, they have share groups organized by topic. So you can see some of those topics here on the slide. And I know that there are many other peer groups. So, like other state-based organizations have developed some similar strategies for offering peer groups for rural grocers. So keep an eye out for those. There's also a guide that the Food Co-op Initiative has developed for store auditing that I think is really helpful. It's something that allows you to get feedback on your store in a standard way. So there's a free online guide on Food Co-op Initiative's website, and it includes kind of a step-by-step instruction for how to complete a store audit. And there are categories of, different departments that you're looking at. What I think can be really beneficial is to kind of have your own little peer group and visit each other's stores to be able to see what everyone else is doing. Rural grocer, the typical grocer, in the grocery industry can be fairly competitive, but I've learned in my time with the Rural Grocery Initiative that many rural grocers see that they're all dealing with some of the same challenges and up against some of the same competitors. And so working together to stand out amongst those national chain competitors can be really effective and meaningful for them. I also will add just a little story here that there's a grocer in Kansas that we work with quite a bit who is just adamant that anytime she's on a road trip, she's got to stop in to see a grocery store that she hasn't visited before. And she really views that as the way to improve her store, a way to learn from each other. And I think that goes back to the phrase of, mimicry is the sincerest form of flattery, or I'm probably butchering that. But that idea of just learning from each other rather than starting from scratch completely. I also want to add that energy efficiency programs are something that can be really beneficial for rural grocery stores. And there are state programs. Zach can probably share more about the Minnesota teams that provide energy audits. There's a similar group in Kansas that will provide energy audits to rural businesses. There's also an organization called the Ratio Institute that has developed a comprehensive audit, energy audit or sustainability audit, and they will visit your store and audit everything that a typical energy audit would complete, but they'll also look at some strategies for cost savings. And the Ratio Institute has that audit, but there is a bit of a cost associated with it. Whereas I think the Minnesota and I know the Kansas program for those audits, it's something you can access for free. And all of these kind of lead up to a federal program called the USDA Rural Energy for America program that provides some dollars to support energy efficiency improvements in rural businesses. In Kansas, I know that many rural grocery stores have benefited from this, and it's been a really effective approach to upgrading some of our aging infrastructure, which Zach already shared is something that has been noted as an issue in Minnesota rural grocery stores. Okay, on to resources for transition. I'm going to pause for a second. I see some chats coming in. Is there anything, Zach, that I should respond to, or should I just keep going?
Yeah, I think you keep going. Yeah, I was just mentioning a few resources with the Clean Energy Resource Team as part of RSDP. Linked in there, Colby Abaz. I'll throw him in his email. And if you want to hear more from him later, if you go to our resource page, the web series page, you could find him. He speaks for about 5 or 10 minutes in the last session that we did on grants. So if you want to hear more about energy audits, after this session's over, anytime you could go and find that past session on grants, and you'll find Colby Abaz talking about the clean energy resources that we can offer.
Great. And I'll also add about this program, the Rural Energy for America program earlier this year or last year. The program, it is a grant program, but there's some match requirement, and the proportions of that were shifted last year to be less match required. And as a result, there was just tons of interest in the program. And so just recently, I saw that USDA was pausing review of grants so that they could catch up on the backlog of applications. But from what I read, the plan was for the program to open back up in the fall. And so it's typically a twice a year cycle for submitting those proposals. Okay, so on to resources for transition. Obviously, in our poll earlier, we saw that transition is not necessarily front of mind for the grocers on this webinar. But in Kansas, and I think, well, across the country, the topic of the silver tsunami has been thrown about in relation to this wave of baby boomers that are nearing or already at retirement. So across the country, there are almost 3 million businesses with owners over the age of 55. And so that means that there will be many businesses that are going to close or change ownership. And that's not unique to urban areas, and it certainly is also happening in our rural communities. In Kansas and Missouri, we've both separately done some studies to show like what is the extent of this tsunami. And so in Kansas, in a survey conducted in 2021, we found that about a quarter of rural grocers were planning to transition within the next 5 years, and that almost 3/4 of them did not have any transition plans for the future ownership of the store. In Minnesota, the numbers are maybe even a little worse, 40% planning to transition in the next 5 years and 80% without any plans for the future ownership of the store. So what happens if these stores close? It goes back to what I mentioned at the top of my presentation, the communities, all those benefits that rural grocery stores are bringing to communities, the community could potentially lose out on those, the access to healthy food, the economic drivers from local jobs, and the community gathering place could be lost. And so the Rural Grocery Initiative, and I know that Minnesota feels this way too, Minnesota Extension feels this way too, really feels like helping grocers start thinking about transition earlier is something we want to prioritize. If we start to think about it earlier, we can start thinking about a plan so that when the inevitable happens, there is less likely of the community losing out. So the Small Business Development Center suggests starting to work on a business transition plan at least 5 years before you plan to exit the business. I've even heard some say you should be thinking about your transition plan as soon as you open the business, and that's more of like a contingency plan. What happens if the worst happens and you have to step away from the business? What would you do with the business? So our team has developed a few different resources related to rural grocery transition planning. We have a grocery business transition planning guide, and this is something we've shared with many community leaders to help community leaders get a sense of the steps that it takes to implement a business transition and the potential for some creative thinking around business transition. If there isn't an obvious successor, maybe there are some community-minded individuals that would want to take it on. Maybe there are some individuals that want to develop a cooperative or consider an alternative ownership model in order to keep a grocery store in the community. A couple of years ago, we also held a webinar series, two different webinar series, all on this topic. And so all of the resources that we developed, and all of the videos from those webinar series are still available online. And when I send these slides, I'll make sure that the links are all included so you can access those later. Um, in the business transition or in our resources, we also um, identified an exit planning checklist that includes kind of the steps that you're going to want to think about if you're implementing a transition plan or starting to think about it. So, and this is adapted from some resources that the Kansas Small Business Development Center created. So step one is building your team, and this is really thinking about who are the technical experts that you'll need along the way to be thinking through your options of transitioning. What are your goals in a transition? How much, like, what do you need in terms of retirement? And are you planning on the sale of your business providing that for you? Um, are there things that you can do how can you benchmark your current business and in the interim or in the short term while you're starting to plan that transition, even make some improvements so that you're in a better position to value the business and then sell the business. Um, Inevitably, between some of the benchmarking and goal setting that you do and then an actual evaluation, you start to notice that there might be a gap. And so this, I think, is part of where a business transition can take time. Sometimes what you expect to come out of evaluation is not necessarily what you get. And so including some time in your plan to be thinking about how you would address that and how you want to move forward. And then there's also a suggestion here of actually putting it down on paper and writing down kind of what that transition plan will look like, who will be taking over, what the timeline will be, and then of course what could that contingency plan look like if the transition plan doesn't follow your exact timeline or needs to be adjusted in some way. We've seen with transition planning that there's really a ton of opportunity for creativity and there's a ton of opportunity for thinking outside of the box to determine who will be taking over this store next, but it requires a lot of time in advance to be preparing. And so in Kansas, we've seen things like school-owned grocery stores, cooperatives are obviously a model that exists across the country, nonprofit stores, and even we call these public-private partnerships where cities and independent operators are coming together to partner to keep a grocery store in the community. And then more recently, we've heard there's been some talk around the municipal grocery store model where a local municipality actually steps in to keep a grocery store open. And so when someone's working on a transition and in their kind of early phases of thinking through a transition, that's when some of those conversations are happening to assess, what is the interest from the community in keeping this grocery store in town, and who are the key players that might be interested in stepping in to support. So to this end, we've developed a specific course for rural grocery transition specialists, and we host this course twice a year. It is something that it is targeted towards individuals that are working in rural communities and supporting grocery stores. And so Zachary Page is one of our past course participants and graduates. It's open to individuals across the country, and we have at this point taught and trained close to 40 individuals from all over the country. And so these are people for grocers to be turning to when they're starting to think about a transition plan. So as you are in that first step was gathering your team. And our thought is that the rural grocery transition specialist near you is one of those technical experts that should be on your team. So I think I ran through all my slides and we've got time now for discussion. So I guess before we go into the discussion, I could stop and just ask if there are any questions or comments before we move into some breakouts. So I'll just pause there for a moment.
All right. I didn't end up leaving our group because Farah was just had so many great things to talk about. But I don't know. We could go first, I guess. Let's start it off. Um, yeah, it was me and Diane and Farah. So Diane MacArthur and I are on the board for Mana Food Co-op. We were kind of more interested in hearing what Farah had to say. So I don't know if you want to talk about some of the challenges. I mean, I could highlight one or two, but if you want to talk as well, feel free to unmute.
Yeah, I just said our biggest challenge being in a extremely rural community, but our biggest challenge is just competing with everybody wants to go to Walmart, Sam's, the Costco's and buy in bulk and then, throw it out the next week because it got gross and whatever, but I don't know. They love to go to Sam's and Costco. They love it in our community.
Yeah, and I heard delivery too is a thing, and then because that's hard to compete with this big superstores delivering, and then yeah, as far as transition store is interesting, where an investor group, a local investor group, bought the store about 10 years ago or so, and then she bought it from them about 8 years ago.
Yep, correct. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we do okay, but there's just, it's just always keeping them keeping them shopping locally.
Yeah.
It's tricky. So,
Well, I'll have to keep the so one thing I just want to mention before we get to the next group too, we only have 3 minutes, but I'm gonna start to have a weekly grocery call, office hours, I'll call it. So we'll put that out in a week or so, and then I'll just have this hour. I think it's gonna be 4 to 5, either right after the webinars, or we'll figure that out. But just want to mention that we could just continue this conversation, and maybe that'll evolve into some peer groups here. So be on the lookout for that. But who wants to go next?
I can share that the group I joined included Gretchen and Cheyenne, and they are in communities that are 6 hours apart. I looked up on the map. Um, but we talked about labor, and we talked about just kind of learning the grocery industry and how even, Cheyenne is just a couple years into the business. Gretchen has been there for 10 years, but even still, the grocery industry is one that has traditionally been passed down from generation to generation. And so it just takes time to really completely know the grocery operation. And so, yeah, we talked about that. Anything you want to add, Gretchen or Cheyenne?
Well, I see Joe or anybody from the last group? Bosaid? I think you were on their call last month too. What did either of you guys talk about, or feel free to unmute and or throw in the chat too. Any final thoughts, Rail?
I just shared our website and email in the chat if you want to connect. In the slides on the last page, there's a place where you can sign up for our newsletter if you want to stay in touch. We typically send out resources, highlight rural grocery stores, and just anything related to rural grocery. We'll also be promoting our National Rural Grocery Summit next May, which I hope you'll all plan to attend. So yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to connect with a few of you, and stay in touch.
Thanks, everyone.